Waiting time isn't wasted time. How many of you guys right now find yourself in a season of waiting? You know, waiting is definitely not the easiest thing to do and can be really difficult to navigate through as well. So what we're going to do today is we're going to dive into understanding what does it look like to wait well and what does it even mean to wait as well on God. Hey guys, welcome back to Salt's YouTube channel. You know, today as we talk about waiting, I'm super excited to talk about this topic because it's something that I've been doing for probably the past 3 years, is just waiting on God. And it can be so difficult when we don't see anything happen and when we think of that, you know, God sometimes has forgotten about what we're waiting for as well. But I want to encourage you today that God hasn't forgotten. God knows exactly what you're looking for and what you're waiting for, and He's asking us to trust and lean on to Him. So what does waiting look like? I think for me in this season right now, I'm waiting for God to bring a life partner into my life, to bring a future husband. But even though I haven't seen anything yet, even though I haven't felt like, you know, there's been anyone, I know that God knows what He's doing. And it's just about how do I wait well in this season? How do I wait until He brings someone into my life? So after being single for a year, I was like to God, I am ready to do this. I am ready to meet a man. I am ready to meet someone as a life partner to do life with. I've grown in my maturity. I have grown in my responsibilities. I know what I'm doing in ministry and that I feel like I am a woman now. And that's honestly how I felt. That was 2 years ago and still I haven't seen or met anyone. And I think the hardest thing about that time in waiting is that I actually always felt like I was ready to meet someone. I felt like I was ready for the promise of God to happen into my life. And when that hasn't happened, it's been difficult because at times I felt like it's easy to try and want to grab on something that might look like God's promise, but actually isn't His real promise for me. So how we wait really matters. And we can see that in the lives of two women in the Bible, Sarai and Hannah. They both have very similar circumstances. They're both barren, both waiting for a child, the promise of God to happen in their life. Yet the way that they wait is very different, and that affects the ultimate outcome of their situation as well. In Genesis 16 verse 2, we see Sarah actually tired of waiting and she decides to just take things into her own hands. It says, "The Lord has prevented me from having children." And then she says to her husband, "Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her." And Abraham agreed with Sarai's proposal. And I think that's so true for a lot of us, that we feel like sometimes we get to a point where we're just sick of waiting. We're tired of waiting, that we want to take things into our own hands. And we're like, God, we waited long enough. I'm just going to do what I want to do. And the danger in that is that when we do that, we often don't get to see God's full promise come to pass. We don't get to see His full provision come to pass. And that's just as a shame, because as we see in Sarai's case, even though they're able to have this son Ishmael, it's not the same as having their son Isaac many years later. Because through Isaac, God's greater promise to Abraham, where he'll have many descendants, is fulfilled through Isaac and not through Ishmael. And what that reminds us is that we can often settle for something that might look like a replica, that might look similar to the promise, which in this case was Ishmael. But at the end of the day, it's not the same thing as having God's full promise, which was Isaac. Now, when we compare how Sarai actually waited to Hannah, we actually see that these two women actually waited really differently from one another. In 1 Samuel chapter 1 verse 10, it says, "Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord." And what we see is that Hannah was faithful in her waiting. She kept on coming back to God, kept on pouring out her heart. And we see that God actually really honored that. And what we also realized, which was probably my favorite part of the story, is that Hannah was able to continually give thanksgiving to God even when her circumstance hadn't changed. Even when she hadn't had her son yet, she was able to still be joyful as well. And in due time, we see that God was faithful, because it says that in due time that God gave her son and she named him Samuel. And what was really amazing about this story is that it wasn't just a few months, it wasn't a few days, but it was actually several years until Hannah saw the promise fulfilled as well. And what we realize is that even though we might have a timeline of how we want God to work, we actually see that God actually is in control and God has His own timing, which is beautiful. So from these two women, I think there are so many things that we can learn about waiting. The main thing that I take away from that is that we don't want to be like Sarah and kind of just take things into our own hands and rush things along and be like, God, I'm good, but to be like Hannah and be like, God, I trust you, and to be faithful in that as well. And it reminds me of a saying, God's delays aren't his denials. And it means that, you know, even though you might not see something come to pass in the timeline that you hoped or in the way that you hoped, it doesn't mean that it's a no from God. It doesn't mean that it's not going to come to pass, but rather it often means that God is trying to do something within us before that promise comes to fulfillment. So when I look back at my season of waiting, I can see that God has continually refined me so much over the years. And what I realize is that he's kind of grown me, especially in the areas of submission, obedience, faithfulness, and just patience as well, because I've had to be challenged to hold on to the promise of God and to really trust and believe him for those things to come to pass. And what I realize is that when I look back, I can see that I would make such a better partner I am today than I was when I thought I was ready 2 years ago to start dating. And I know that I would be better to serve someone, I would be better to love someone, because that's where God has refined me and grown me in this season of waiting. So I hope this video encourages you to remember that the waiting time isn't wasted time, that there is so much that God can do to refine you in this season of waiting. So if you're waiting for something, whether it be a job, whether it be for a life partner, whether it be for a calling or, you know, direction on your life, I encourage you to ask God, you know, like, how do you want to refine me in this season as I wait? And I know that as you allow him to refine you and mold you, that you will become a better person to be able to receive the promise that God has for you when the time comes to pass. So if this video encouraged you and you are in a season of waiting as well for God to do something in your life, I'd love for you to comment it down below so that I can keep you in prayer. And if you enjoyed this video, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to Salt's YouTube channel for more videos on singleness, dating, and relationships.